I am Becky Colwell. I'm the program manager for resources here at Acadia. I feel like I've known Anne forever, but I haven't. But the long-standing connections and relationships of her family and her people to this place that we call Acadia makes it feel like she's been here for eons, and her people have been here since time immemorial. And so this is Wabanaki homeland, this is Penobscot homeland, and I'm not going to introduce Anne as who she is as a Indigenous person, but only in the relationship of the first time I was introduced to Anne is this amazing presentation that she did, video for First Light Learning Journey, and she's probably going to talk a little bit about her work and the sense of place and the connections that Acadia is for Indigenous people here, but also just how that's being framed, celebrated, and the work that we're doing around creating relationships back, access to the land, and why that's so freaking important, and if you already know that, and also some of the ongoing concerns, issues, and challenges with this work. For us to stand up and say, hey, you are on Wabanaki homeland, and oh, by the way, this is a national park, and you can only do these certain things, and you're not allowed to do those kinds of things, and who are you anyway? And so we're in an ongoing building of relationship and conversation around some of this work, and so Anne is going to be one of those many people who are sharing, and in a deeply personal way, how to frame this thinking around this and how we start building those honest relationships. So thank you, Lena.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I really appreciate that introduction. Just before we get started, I have lost the use of my cursor, so I can't click got it on the screen. So I apologize, and maybe somebody could jump in and help me out.
Cursor.
Sorry.
So your pad won't work?
Yeah, like I don't have access to reaching.
Why am I pretending like this is somehow connected to your computer? I mean, I think I might have plugged in.
You hit like enter. See, like I can almost see if you look at the screen where it's like I can hover over things, but I can't actually see.
Did you get it back?
So I'm screen sharing. The recording is in progress. I'm going to press play. And I think if this little bar can get dragged out of the way,
You got it, okay.
On your screen as well. All right, well, thank you so much for your patience with these little technical challenges that always seem to pop up no matter how prepared everybody is. Thank you all again, and thank you so much for being here. I like to, hi Allison. I like to introduce myself in Penobscot before starting because it's just a way to acknowledge the cultural connection as well as the importance of language to these spaces and speaking in the native language. So Daliwizi, as my name is, Daliwizi and Pollard Ranco, Banawebskewi. I am Penobscot. And Chiwalilani, Dalamizi, thank you so much. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be here with you all today at the park on this beautiful yet chilly day, which feels like we went back a few months in time. There's actually a frost warning tonight, but we'll get started. So when Marie and Rebecca asked me to do this brown bag lunch, we wanted to, discuss the. If I mute my volume, will it not give those
They won't be able to
notifications?
hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's fine.
So sorry for those distractions. So when I was asked to do this talk, I think that one of the primary things that we were hoping to discuss is just the overall visibility of Indigenous people here, the history, and why is it that Indigenous people are misrepresented, underrepresented, and just overall invisible in a lot of cases, not only here at the park, but in a more broad context with land conservation organizations in Maine. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about my personal experiences here at Acadia National Park growing up. This was always a place that my dad and I came to, a really special place, especially in the wintertime, the off season. I came here with my dad. we would go to Sand Beach. We'd play ball on the ball field, ledge lawn, which I recently learned is actually a encampment, an old encampment. So it was kind of ironic when I learned that we were, playing baseball on the, ball field. And at one point, not too long ago, in recent history of Wabanaki connections here, the sorry, I'm losing my train of thought every time I hear that.
I'm looking for how to use that.
So nobody can hear me if I
If you
mute mine?
if you mute, nobody will be able to hear you.
Okay.
There's probably some function in there.
Mhm. So anyways, back in 2022, after spending my lifetime coming here as a child with my father and later on in university, I brought friends here from all over the world, and I was always so proud to share this place and this beautiful part of my homeland with people from various different countries. And I never had an opportunity to come here by myself and really connect with these places on an ancestral level. So last winter, I set out to expand my horizons in that connection and pursue some photography. I'm a photographer and absolutely love the morning light, being Wabanaki, people of the dawn. It's just like almost a instinctual thing to watch the sunrise. It feels like the most natural thing in the world. So I was really grateful to be able to stay in Acadia or in Bar Harbor with a friend who had an inn and has an inn and allowed me to stay here. These are just a few photographs of the park from an Indigenous perspective, and it's not really a perspective that we get to see all too often when it comes to photographs of the park. They're largely taken and shared by non-Indigenous people. So I really am a big proponent of photography as a way to amplify Indigenous voices and perspective. This is a early morning hike, I think up on Beehive, watching the sunrise. Of course, Sand Beach, I'm sure you all know that view very well. And then when I was talking to my dad and asking him about stories of our visits to the park, I said, Dad, do you have any photographs of you and I, or maybe something, some experiences that you'd had here? And he sent me these photographs that he'd taken back in maybe the 70s or 80s of Sand Beach. And I think Otter Cliffs, I wasn't quite, it looks a little bit different than what I recognize Otter Cliffs to be, but he was pretty sure it was Otter Cliffs. And this is just another example of some Wabanaki perspective of the park. As most of you know, this is sort of a rough map with very flexible boundaries of what traditional territories would have looked like of the Wabanaki tribes. Of course, the Penobscot tribe and Passamaquoddy tribes sort of intermingle in the Acadia National Park area, and the boundaries are shared and resources would have been shared. The Passamaquoddy word for Bar Harbor is the clam gathering place. It's, I think it's Monaskatik is one of the pronunciations for that. But it's just a very important resource. All of these islands are extremely important resources. I'm going to show you a few photographs here and feel free to chime in. Does anybody know Madakawando? Is that a name that rings a bell to some of you? How about Joseph Orono? Does that name ring a bell to some of you? And then Astaku, does that name ring a bell to some of you? And then when we look at the faces of these men, white men, I think that their names are a lot more recognizable on a larger scale, especially non-park employees. If you were to say oh, Champlain Mountain, Dora Mountain, Sieur de Mont, these are all people who spark not only historical memory, but an actual relevant memory and connection to the park, because so many mountains and so many things are named after these white explorers who came here and often get credited with being the first to do this and that and the next thing. One case in point is this sign that I found while I was hiking Elliott Mountain last month. And the text is Elliott Mountain, named for Charles William Elliott, 1834 to 1926, one of the first to cruise these island-dotted down east waters, 1872 to 1882. He bought this land and built the first summer cottage on this shore, 1882, founder of the Hancock County Trustees of Public Reservations, 1903, through which the lands were assembled and the Lafayette National Monument, now Acadia National Park, was established. You know, after reading that, if you have no context for any of the history, you know, you're going to be giving him an applause. I thought, wow, he did great. He was one of the first people to come here. He was the first to build a summer cottage here, and look at all the good things he did. But it's really at the expense of Wabanaki people. And I wanted to read the Spencer Phipps Bounty Proclamation of 1755. By his honor, Spencer Phipps Esquire, Lieutenant Governor and Commander-in-Chief in and over His Majesty's Province of the Massachusetts Bay in New England, a proclamation. Whereas the tribe of Penobscot Indians have repeatedly, in a perfidious manner, acted contrary to their solemn submission unto His Majesty, long since she made and frequently renewed, I have therefore, at the desire of the House of Representatives, with the advice of His Majesty's Council, thought fit to issue this proclamation and to declare the Penobscot tribe of Indians to be enemies, rebels, and traitors to His Majesty King George II. And I do hereby require His Majesty's subjects of this province to embrace all opportunities of pursuing, captivating, killing, and destroying all and every one of the aforesaid Indians. I do hereby promise that there shall be paid out to the province equal treasury to all and any of the laid forces over and above their bounty upon fulfillment, their wages and subsistence, the premiums of bounty following. For every male Indian prisoner above the age of 12 years, that shall be taken and brought to Boston, 50 pounds. For every male Indian scalp brought in as evidence of their being killed as aforesaid, 40 pounds. For every female Indian prisoner taken and brought in as aforesaid, and for every male Indian prisoner under the age of 12 years taken and brought in aforesaid, 25 pounds. For every scalp of such female Indian or male under the 12 years of age brought in as evidence of their being killed as aforesaid, 20 pounds, given as at the council chamber in Boston, this 3rd day of November, 1755, in the 29th year of the reign of our sovereign Lord George II, by the grace of God of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, Defender of the Faith, etc. God save the King. So can you imagine your people have dwindled in numbers after Europeans have brought over diseases that wipe out almost 90% of the population. And now you have bounties on your heads. You can't be in these spaces. You're being hunted here. You're being hunted on your beloved islands, your beloved coast, your beloved homeland. You have a price on your head. And that was what my ancestors faced, the heartbreaking decision of leaving these places, forcibly leaving these places and going to, as refugees, to the safer, quote unquote, safer regions, such as the Penobscot Reservation. So you start to see, less Indigenous presence here because my ancestors had to make the very, very difficult decision to look out for the well-being of the descendants and their families. And I can only imagine the heartbreak of not only losing so many beloved family members, but being faced with losing land and connection to land that you have loved and has been in, running through your veins for thousands and thousands of years. So that was a very, very real thing that my ancestors faced. And, when we fast forward to the present day, and we're looking at erasure narratives and misrepresentation of Wabanaki history and people, oftentimes we feel very invisible in these spaces. While we continue connections against all odds, and we came here throughout the centuries that passed since the bounty, we were feeling very, very invisible in a lot of these situations where people don't either understand that Wabanaki people are still in Maine, have any idea of the Wabanaki tribes. This is something, just a couple of weeks ago, I was faced with talking to some teachers and some educating work that I was doing, and just said to the students, hey, do any of you know the Wabanaki tribes? Can you just name some of the Wabanaki tribes? And none of the students knew. And then we turned to the teachers and said, can you name some of the Wabanaki tribes? And the teachers were completely silent. So it's something that is so endemic where, we are faced with being so invisible in a place that isn't so home. It's as much home to us as, anybody, any creature who lives here. We're all here together, and our relations. Kadalnabemnawak is the word we have in Penobscot and Wabanaki, which means all my relations. And that just talks about the interconnectedness of all living creatures and Turtle Island, and specifically, the Northeast Woodlands region that have been here since time immemorial. So those are all our relations. We've been here since time immemorial. These are just the modern day holdings of the Penobscot tribe, Passamaquoddy tribe, Maliseet tribe, and Micmac tribe, compared to the territories that I showed a little ways here. So you can see the Penobscots all the way from Katahdin to the Penobscot Bay, Passamaquoddies, the coastal territories, Maliseet, what is now the border of Canada and the United States, Mi'kmaq, a little bit farther to the northeast, and Abenaki, a little bit farther to the southwest. But now today, we are constrained to a reservation system where we have a tiny island in the middle of the Penobscot River that has no food bearing land. It's really, really hard to farm there, let alone have a garden. The trust lands are oftentimes, I don't know if you can see from this map, but the trust lands are in the red. And what's one observation about the geographic placement of these trust lands, just from what you can see? Like what is
Much of the coast.
right? Exactly. So we have really no coastal access whatsoever. So access to traditional foods that would have sustained us for thousands and thousands of years, access to relationships with these places, the islands of, here's just a little bit of a zoom in of the Merchant Row, Mount Desert Island, and some surrounding islands that we would have all had, you know, relationships with. Families, specific families would have had, you know, regions of importance, but there was a lot of mixing and intermingling because we didn't have the law, property law, like the Western point of view brought over. And then just to sort of overlap, here's the map of Mount Desert Island and the holdings. Wish I could get rid of this little bar at the bottom of the screen because it's sort of blocking out Idaho, but we won't go through that again. Anyway, so you can just see that Acadia National Park has island holdings as well as easements on traditional Wabanaki homeland where we're still ongoing negotiations to be able to harvest sweetgrass. And so, you know, it's not like the relationship between the Park Service and Wabanaki people has been stellar for, you know, the recent history, but I think that there are a lot of dedicated individuals here in this room and beyond who are working to try to make access to traditional resources such as sweetgrass, birch bark, and other culturally significant medicines more available to Wabanaki people. But I think we have a long way to go in that. And starting these conversations about the invisibility that Wabanaki people feel here is just one step in the right direction. So before the highways of today, we had water highways. We didn't have a construction crew out repaving the roads. It's the traffic that I got stuck in today, but I guess the only traffic would have been the tidal traffic, right? And having to consider the weather and the tides, and in terms of navigating all of these riverways and waterways and bays and ocean areas, we would have had very, very important maps in our culture, oral traditions that were passed down about navigation and how we got from point A to point B. It would have been completely the water highways as well as portage routes to cut off dangerous areas in the ocean. So if you think about the huge swath of territory that would have been traveled, we'll just look at this map right now, but you know, from Katahdin all the way down to the bay, that's over 100 miles of waterway and variable conditions. And this is a birch bark canoe that was built last summer that I helped build, and then I played a very, very, very small part in building. I think I was there for a day, so I'm not going to say I did not help build it. I watched it being built. Full disclosure. But then I got to paddle in it, which was really fun with my dad, who's in the back. My dad actually last year started a paddle from the Union River in Ellsworth all the way to the Salt Pond in Blue Hill, which is, you know, one of the traditional routes. Oh, my cursor doesn't work here. I have no pointer, but if you look up towards Ellsworth, it's at the north side of the map, and you can see Union River Bay. So they put it in the Union River that opens into Union River Bay, and at Newbury Neck, if anybody can possibly see from on the screen, sorry, it's kind of small. They portaged Newbury Neck and then paddled to Blue Hill and entered the Blue Hill Falls, Salt Pond. And that was one of the first times in recent memory that Penobscot and Wabanaki people had paddled traditional portage route. And we hope to expand that as well. We hope to come to Mount Desert Island. We hope to start in Verona, which is at the mouth of the Penobscot River, and travel to Neskeg, which is another very important gathering place. And why am I talking about places that aren't Mount Desert Island? Because, you know, to me, we don't look at Mount Desert Island as its own fixed space. You know, these are all very fluid spaces of travel, and places that we love are not defined by, you know, colonial terminology. So all of the bay is very, very important, stretching all the way to the Schoodic Peninsula, especially for the, you know, Penobscot people and, you know, our traditional territories, and where it would have overlapped with Passamaquoddy territory. So against all odds, we are still here. We're very resilient people, but some ongoing challenges to this day include recognition of our sovereignty as people. Cultural preservation and revitalization is an ongoing and very much thriving effort in the communities. Reconnection to homeland is something that, you know, I've strived for over the past, you know, few decades of my life, to be, ever since I was little. My parents wanted me to understand that our traditional homeland wasn't the reservation system, that it was far, far beyond that. So I grew up coming to Acadia National Park, like I mentioned with my dad, and to the coast and all over the map that I just showed you. My parents knew that it was so important to share that with me so that I would know, you know, what our people loved and connect with that love as well, which is something that's just so universal. Food sovereignty and traditional foodways. So as I touched upon earlier, when we're looking at, you know, the map of resources and what the reservation system constrains one to, which is not being able to go out and harvest seafood, not being able to really have a good place to grow food. And then in addition to that, over the course of the 20th century, 19th, 20th century government commodity foods oftentimes were extremely unhealthy for Wabanaki people, included high sugar, high, you know, flour, and lots of foods that were completely the antithesis of traditional foodways. So now when you're looking at populations of Indigenous people in Maine, our life expectancy is 55 years on average, compared to 74 years for non-Indigenous people in Maine. And these are inequities in access to food and clean water that are ongoing. Coastal land access to cultural resources, and land back is another really big movement right now. Programs for the health of our communities touch upon those inequities that I mentioned, as well as language revitalization and preservation. I am a language apprentice for one of the last living Penobscot language speakers. She's an elder in her 70s, and she chose me to be her apprentice. So I meet with her once per week, and we talk about traditional ways, traditional words, and we try to incorporate as much language into just like everyday vocabulary that we can, you know, discuss, like, oh, we're going to go to the grocery store. What are we going to buy at the grocery store? So I can pretty much do my grocery shopping in Penobscot now. These are really empowering things, but then when we go back to the park, we don't see this reflected at all in any of the signage here. You know, there's no Penobscot language signs. There's no Passamaquoddy language signs. Welcome to Acadia National Park. Welcome to Wabanaki homeland. So, you know, going back to this erasure narrative that I believe is both promulgated in a intentional way and unintentional way, but both are, you know, equally responsible for telling a truthful story. And I think that when we look at how can the park do a better job, I think, you know, definitely moving in the right direction. And I'm so grateful for Marie and Rebecca and the Cultural Connections to the Park program that has brought in numerous Wabanaki people to do demonstrations and drumming at Cadillac. And I think that there's so many opportunities to have more presence here in the signage and the maps. And that's something that, you know, especially with the Unigrid, that's a really exciting thing. Is it okay to talk a little bit about that? So looking forward to next year, I'm going to be helping to I guess do a little bit of a survey amongst Wabanaki people about what do you want to see in the unigrid? What's a good way to represent Wabanaki people on this map that people from all over the world are going to be taking and looking at? And that's a really big thing and great opportunity. And I'm so grateful that the park has realized the shortcoming in just the map itself and the ability for that map to reach a lot of people. So it's a really exciting development, and hopefully within the next, 3 or 4 or 5 years, we could start to see some signs in Penobscot and Passamaquoddy. And I think that we're moving in the right direction, and we really need to amplify Indigenous voices and have as many Indigenous voices present as possible, because I can't speak for all Wabanaki people, and no Wabanaki individual is going to feel comfortable being the voice for Wabanaki people. It's a team and collective effort. And I think that, it's going in that direction. And yeah, so I wanted to open it up to questions. I guess that's basically what I had for you today. We're a little bit ahead of time, but that's something, touching upon a lot of different things, such as, how can we represent Wabanaki artists and photographers and writers as a potential way to amplify Indigenous voices, as well as through signage. And, from a personal opinion, I would love to see the names of some of these people replaced with Wabanaki names, because they get far too much credit for something that has been detrimental to Wabanaki people. And to celebrate that is, in essence, celebrating that history that is so devastating to my people. And then talking a little bit about access, and in terms of restoration projects at the park, how can we incorporate Indigenous people's voices into not only restoration, but cultural use plans at every opportunity. And I would love to see, I haven't been out to Idaho yet, but each island in Merchants Row and Penobscot Bay has its own character. If any of you have been out to some of the islands, it's really, really incredible how each has its own ecosystem. There are different plants that grow on each of the islands, depending on where you are. And get out to Idaho and see, maybe has there been like a cultural use survey, or
Was there one? Or
resource survey, excuse me?
Not a Wabanaki cultural
Mhm.
use study. We started a little bit of work a few years ago and never finished it,
Mhm.
actually. But there's some wonderful documentation of Idaho as tradition,
Yeah.
as people being there traditionally for thousands of years, so.
Does anybody know one of the most significant remains that, if you were to go out today, what could you see that would alert you to Wabanaki people having been there? Any ideas? Like one of the resources? Did you have
graham shells?
Yeah, the shell middens. Yeah, absolutely. Or shell mounds, which are, hundreds of, and if not thousands of years of accumulated shells. I think the oldest is out on Vinyl Haven, it's dating back to 5,000 years. But our original stories, our creation stories, talk about how the islands came to be. So it really shows that as the water receded, Wabanaki people were there to, welcome the islands that emerged. And that's our belief that, we have always been here, and certainly our stories and rich oral traditions speak to that. So I wanted to leave it at that and welcome questions. And thank you so much for being here on your lunch break and sharing this lunch with me.
We do have a question online. Lori, do you want to unmute yourself and ask?
Sure. Hi, Anne. Lori Schaefer from Friends of Acadia. Thanks so much. I'm just curious if you could share a little more about what this personally feels like to you to be building this relationship and doing this work with the park and helping educate some of the rest of us along the way, and even to your family. Like, have you discussed it with your family, and how does that feel to you?
Yeah, I think it's really, it's empowering in a sense to be able to, have a voice. And certainly my ancestors, I'm descended from Madaka Wando and Chief Joseph Orono and all the really strong Indigenous people who came to the table with the colonists and had these discussions about access and trying to, make sure that everybody had fair access to these places. And to me, it's just like a little bit of a family legacy that, carries on. And certainly over the past few hundred years, my ancestors have fought for our rights and our freedom to be in these places, and many lost their lives to be here. So as a younger generation, being able to talk to you all today is something that, previous generations wouldn't have been able to do. And to me, that's a privilege that, these opportunities are open for Indigenous people to have a voice. And yeah, I do share it with my family, and they're really happy to hear that. I spoke about my dad a little bit and his connection and our connection to the park. And it feels like a full circle because, growing up, he lived in Bar Harbor for a little bit with some family members in the summertime. And I think he shared the same feeling that Indigenous people are just so forgotten, conveniently forgotten, and very invisible in these places. And certainly the Abbey Museum has done a lot to heighten visibility for Indigenous people, but my dad shares that feeling that there is a long way to go. I would love to see, and I'm just going to put it out there on the table, just like a lifetime park pass for Wabanaki people, so that every time we go into the park, we don't have to self-identify and, oh, we're different, we're Wabanaki, here we are, and can we please have a pass? And sometimes the language that's used is like, oh, you can have a complimentary pass, and it's a little bit like, that was my most recent experience a few weeks ago coming to the parks. Oh, let me get you a complimentary pass. And it was a little bit of a condescending tone. It was the first time I'd encountered that in a few years, but going back about 5 or 6 years ago, you had to show your ID, your tribal ID, to be able to get or that was asked for. Let me see your ID to show that you're Wabanaki. And like, we're the only race on earth that has the card that shows that you're a certain race. And a lot of Wabanaki people refuse to get those cards because it's really dehumanizing. So that would be something that my dad, when I talked to him about it, is, easier access for Wabanaki people to be able to get into the park. And so,
Let me just say that,
Yeah.
that you should not have been asked that. I will make sure.
Yeah.
Wabanaki people do not have to get a pass, they don't have to ask for a pass. That's standard of, so
Interesting.
I'll circle back with lines of communication.
Yeah, that's been like so I have like I save my passes, the Wabanaki pass that I get, just because I just feel like
There should be no such thing as a
So-
Wabanaki pass.
well, it's not a Wabanaki pass, it's just like
Okay.
it's framed as like a you can get in for free kind of thing, when in reality, so it's kind of like, yeah,
Welcomed and
yeah,
waved through.
yeah,
That has been,
yeah.
that's supposed to be our.
But would you still have to identify as
No.
Wabanaki?
No,
Hmm.
no.
I'd love to do a dry run with you.
Okay.
Going through the game. I'm really curious how this is gonna
In the back seat.
play. Okay.
That should be clearly articulated.
Yeah. So I think like when we're talking about ways that things that can be improved upon, within a very short amount of time, that would be one thing, right? So yeah, thank you for that question, Laura. Sorry, I kind of deviated a little bit, but that was just something my dad had shared with me when we talked about this presentation.
Other questions? Did you have something? Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, what did she say when she goes to the booth?
Well, she's driving through, don't stop, just go.
Say she's not Scott, and whoever there should say, welcome home and enjoy your, enjoy your visit. And that should be the end of it.
And in a sense, it would be almost nice not to even have to identify, because people don't have to like say who they are, what racial background they come from when they enter the park. So it'd be kind of nice, like, say like there's a waiver for Black people, they're not gonna be, I'm Black, welcome. We hope you enjoy your stay. So yeah, I think that like, number one, like that would be great. And then maybe just like a park pass that we could have in our windshield so that, we don't even have to say who we are. Yeah.
Right.
Because it can be really vulnerable, there's stories.
Should be easy enough to do that, like,
And I was thinking, those passes could be distributed to the tribes themselves so that, people could go into I don't know what office it would be, and like get the park pass. And so it wouldn't even be like, oh,
All right. So, let's see. Paige, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Hi, how are you? Thanks for being here today. And yeah, so I work with a lot of, well, also OCO. I'm from Cherokee Nation, Oklahoma. So it's great to see Indigenous representation in the park, and that it's increasing significantly year by year. And so I get the privilege of working with youth and volunteer programs in the park and just helping people connect to the park in new ways, and particularly marginalized groups most recently. And so I just have a question for you. If you have any ideas about new or expanded programs that would be co-created between the Wabanaki and Acadia National Park to increase the representation throughout the park. And I've always had the thought of like a Wabanaki youth ambassadors, or, you know, in partnership with the Abbey Museum, or, I mean, there's just so many different directions it could go, but I just wanted to hear if you'd had any thoughts about ways to increase that representation that you were speaking of earlier.
First off, I love the idea about the youth ambassadors. That wasn't something that had crossed my mind, but that would be a great way to develop closer relationships. As a photographer and writer, I love to also look at other Indigenous photographers and writers and artists and look at ways to connect their work in terms of representation of Indigenous people at the park. You know, certainly we offer a really beautiful perspective of over thousands and thousands of years of seeing these sites, you know, through our ancestors. And we certainly carry that in our DNA and our lineage of being here. And they're often, I don't really think there's been an artist in residency from a Wabanaki person. So trying to find ways to encourage those applications, as well as perhaps creating other programs to welcome artists to be able to stay here. And I think as a photographer, seeing the golden hours, you know, the early morning light and the evening light, that's just such a beautiful thing. And you can't always catch that if you're driving from, you know, Indian Island or, you know, off res. It's, you know, you can't get here safely, and providing safe opportunities for Wabanaki people to stay and do their art and do their thing. That's just one possibility. Quite nice to meet you.
Thanks, Paige.
Hi
and-
there. Oh, so sorry. It's Allison. I'm an interp ranger, and I was wondering if it'd be all right if I asked a question.
Nope, and then, or actually, let's start with Julie, who had her hand raised, and then we'll come back to you, Allison.
Sounds great.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here. I'm a board member on Friends of Acadia. And just to follow up on things that you have said and Paige just said, and Rebecca and others, I've been noodling around on this. And of course, I was thinking just yesterday about Wabanaki youth ambassadors, perhaps even in Acadia Youth Conservation Corps. I was thinking also exactly about an artist in residence program specifically for the Wabanaki. And I think there's certainly a lot of room for, you know, co-interpretive work. Rebecca, I know you and your team are collaborating with Wabanaki about that. But I just wanted to applaud all of these ideas. And I'm wondering, Paige, if there is something we at Friends of Acadia can do specifically in terms of the Yellow Bust Fund, or in terms of teacher fellows and grants, and specifically targeting some of those for the Wabanaki. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So just, I can follow up more later, but we did, before the pandemic, we actually did have an Acadia teacher fellow at the St. Croix site that we tried to have it be a Wabanaki teacher, a Wabanaki tribal member. or at least a teacher at the tribal schools. They've unfortunately been struggling with housing and with the pandemic. So we haven't been hosting that. And Becky Colwell was aware of that position as well. But yeah, there's definitely many, many ways to expand and grow. But what's most important is to do it with the tribes and co-creation, and which I know you're aware of, Julie. And just, yeah, looking at what all the different options are. So, and ideas.
I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say.
Yeah, I think
Okay, sure.
relationship building is probably first and foremost, like the most important thing in terms of working with Wabanaki. If you're working with anybody, we should all be building relationships before you're going and saying, oh, we've created this program for you. You know, really a lot of Indigenous input, and I think Indigenous led projects. So if there were to be a Wabanaki artist in residency program, that program should be developed by Wabanaki people, because we have certainly the considerations of a lot of, you know, instability in terms of housing to begin with. So making sure that there's housing available here for Wabanaki people to stay, stipends for living expenses. I don't know, I'm not super familiar with the program as it stands now with the artists in residency have.
Jay, you and Jay.
Hi.
We can set up a series of these
Yeah,
side
exactly.
conversations with
Yeah.
FOA, but Jay coordinates that program, and so, you
Yeah.
know,
More than happy to have the
Super,
conversation.
super.
I'd love to have the conversation. We've
Yeah.
been talking about it for years. We'd love to see it happen.
Maybe like Instagram takeover from a Wabanaki person. To share.
Volunteers tribute to organize that, that sounds fabulous.
Seriously. There are many talented Wabanaki photographers and artists who are on Instagram, and I'm sure, you know, it'd be really excellent in terms of leading something like that. Yeah, so telling stories from an Indigenous perspective by Indigenous people.
we used to have well, I don't say we, but the language camp used to be at Scootink. And then last year when Madonna and Edwina were there with us we talked seriously about trying to revitalizing that opportunity.
Nice.
All it takes is funding, all it takes.
Isn't that true?
But
Seriously, though.
brainstorming
Yeah.
how, what are the priorities and how to start building up these out again, absolutely, so.
Maybe like.
And oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say maybe like a survey from the tribes and give like an opportunity for a lot of voices to so they get paid the money. Go ahead, Paige. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm so sorry. No, and I'm just hearing about like work across the national park system. It's really exciting, and you know, parks hiring a tribal liaison, you know, that can be like the keeper of this work and these programs, because I think we can build a relationship with the tribes, and we can have these amazing Indigenous led programs, and we can have funding from FOA and other partners, and we can, you know, build out these programs. But I think my biggest concern is like, who's going to be the keeper, and who's going to be that like point person that can, you know, connect all the people and keep things flowing smoothly, and like tell the fee station that this is how you welcome Wabanaki people, or who's the right person to contact for this program. Yeah, so I just think about like, I think about a liaison and a staff person that can be like that glue for a lot of this work that could get built up. But
Paige, all it takes is money. No, that's one of my dreams, my visions as well, for sure. Yeah, consistency of building relationship.
Allison, thank you for being patient. Do you want to ask your question? Allison, are you still there, Allison? You're muted right now.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, Ann. So I'm an interpretive ranger. So we therefore give programs and interface with the public a lot. And I'm going to ask a question that may be the kind of question you want to think about. I'm happy to hear from you if you have input right now, but if it's something you want to think about and get back to me, that's fine too. And I'm just kind of wondering if there's 1, 2, or 3 messages that you'd like to see us incorporate into our programs and into our messaging to park visitors that you really want them to know.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this over the past few weeks. I've done 2 separate trainings with returning interpreters as well as new interpreters, so people who haven't been here before and probably haven't heard about Wabanaki people before. The latter was a huge responsibility. I'm still wondering if I did my people justice, but things to talk about, I think, with the park and conversations with Marie, Wabanaki people are resistant and resilient. Are those the two?
Those were just what I had. Those
Well,
are just
I mean,
my-
like, I think of resilience as a really big, I use it all the time.
Yeah.
Resilience, we're so resilient, we're still here against all odds. Another thing that I think in terms of some being out in the field interpretation, you're talking about portage routes and the maps that, you know, Wabanaki people, this is just kind of speaking extemporaneously and things that I have thought about, but I don't know if they would be like my top 3 things that would be most important, but, you know, talk a little bit about, you know, how did we get here, portage routes. I think that would be something in terms of giving you a solid top 3 that I would, you know, get back to on but being resilient people who are still here, who still have connections to the park, who still have ongoing challenges in terms of accessing resources here at the park. And maybe a little bit about the erasure narrative, just to try to get that out there, that there are and have been misrepresentations of Wabanaki people, and talking about the importance of, you know, accurately representing a people and the challenges behind that, just to be upfront and honest with people, you know, that it is challenging and it can be uncomfortable, but it's important to talk about regardless. So I hope that was somewhat helpful, mostly rambling, but thank you for your question.
Super, thanks.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
First of all, just thank you for being here and sharing your art and your people's story with us and your own story. Just really appreciate hearing from you. What, like, do you have any resources, either like artists that you would, like resources that you would suggest that you enjoy that would be cool for us to look at?
In terms of like,
either of like stories, like just ways to like continue learning and like getting those stories into the way that we talk about the park.
yeah, I think that one of the best resources that is out there. Oh, I can't screen share. I was going to bring up the Acadia Island domain. A very comprehensive publication by the Park Service that I use a lot in terms of my own research. See how it is.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, and I've heard that from other Wabanaki people, that it's a trusted source that
Definitely.
that was the park's ethnographic overview and assessment, and if you don't have a copy of that, Marie can show you how to get it on, it's a digital online.
When it's printed, does it work?
It's a big blue book, but it's
Yeah.
printed. Unfortunately, we don't have
Yeah,
it
maybe.
anymore. We need to reprint it, although Marie says it's
You can search it online, word search
So look,
online.
I've just brought it up. So everybody, this is great. It's so accessible. All you have to do is Google Astakus Island Domain PDF, and this incredible over 500-page resource is at your disposal, like right here, 5 seconds. And it just talks, it gives a timeline. I'm trying to find the table of contents. So chapter 1, Introduction to Mount Desert Island as Historical Anthropological Problem. Chapter 2, Wabanaki Cultures, Ethnographic Baseline, European Explorers. Chapter 3, Chapter 4, Traders and Raiders. So it really, it gives a very comprehensive, from, I think it was 1600 to 2000, what was the history? 2004.
Early 2000s.
Yeah, so I highly recommend giving it a read. And it talks a lot about cultural resources and whatnot as well. So very 1500 to 2000. Yeah, so a lot of history in there, but it ties it to the present as well, which I really appreciate, that it's not just like, oh, this is what happened in the colonial period. It kind of brings it to modern day as well. Good question. Thank you. And artists, I'd be happy to send out like a list of, I guess if you went to the Abbey Museum's website and represented artists, there should be like a good list of WebNFB artists if you're curious about that. Cool. And the gift shop as well. So anybody who's physically in Bar Harbor can go to the gift shop and support Native artists.
We're near the top of the hour, but maybe one last question if anybody has one. Or we can, oh, were you?
No, I have, unfortunately have a hard stop at one, like, really valuable, but I wanted to say that, you know, as Anne said, thank you, Anne, for coming.
Oh, thank you so much.
And Anne doesn't represent all of her community and all communities, but she's a wonderful resource and very giving, brilliantly talented artist and person. And we, so a lot of the things you brought up are ongoing conversations. Anne will be around more and again, and so if there's desires for other kinds of conversations or resource material, or just ask some of those hard questions that we don't always feel comfortable asking. We have this great friend and person that we're very grateful for.
That's
So
very kind.
anyway.
Thank you so much. And I hope everybody feels comfortable asking questions. And the last thing I want is people to hold back on asking questions in fear of being offensive, because, you know, I've heard it all. And I can guarantee you that your questions are probably far more respectful than those that I've heard. But I
Don't
invite you.
challenge us.
I'll let you know if you win. But I really welcome you to reach out. My Instagram is Pollard Ranco. I'm a pretty active user on social media. Also, my email also happens to be annpollardranco@gmail.com. So it's pretty easy. You just write down my name to remember. I'd love to connect outside of the space.
So Nick and Delia, are they ancestors to you? I think in that newspaper clipping, are they?
You know, they're not direct,
They're
not
not,
direct.
okay, I
Yeah,
wasn't
I'm
sure.
more of the Kohler line.
Okay.
Yeah, the Ranco is pretty
On the side of
recent.
the family.
Yeah,
Okay.
but yeah, that was a really cool article. Thank you for that.
And are you gonna have a piece, anything or any photography in the Indian market in Bar Harbor in June?
I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it there, to be honest. Yeah,
Okay.
most of my photography would be like hired from publications. So I sell my photography and do like freelance photography and not so much sales of prints.
Okay,
Yeah.
there is, but I guess then there is also, I think it's the first Saturday and Sunday in June, in downtown at the Village Green. There is, it's an Abbey Museum Indian market, and it's a Wabanaki focused
I didn't realize
art show and selling opportunity and other stuff. So if that's something that you are available on that weekend, you may want to pop down.
that. Yeah, definitely.
It's in Bar Harbor.
Yeah, it's right at the Village Green. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all.
Well,
so
thank you
much.
very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's true. So it should be on the website.